Hey everybody, this is Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff, and welcome to the very first episode of Tech Throwback. So we are all so entranced by all the new devices that are coming out in the future that we tend to forget about the past. So what I want to do with this is periodically take a chance to look at some devices and gadgets and cool things from the past, see how they're standing up over time, if they're a classic, or if they kind of just suck by today's standards. So the first item that I want to take a look at is the Gameboy Micro, which I feel is a severely underappreciated little Game Boy and also is the very last of the Game Boy line. It was pretty much smashed into oblivion by the DS, so this was released after the DS and it really didn't sell very well, but I love this thing. I think it is quite a classic as you have a chance to play a lot of GBA games and a lot of SNES ports, although it's not really like a real Game Boy where you can use any of the previous Game Boy cartridges. You can only play Game Boy Advanced games, but just the sheer size of this thing is awesome. So let's go ahead and have a chance to talk about it, play with it, see a little bit of how gameplay goes, and you can decide whether you think that this is a classic or a throwback. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. And now for some mildly inappropriate humor. This is actually the commercial, the only real commercial that I can see for the Game Boy Micro. This was released for Canada. I did not see one in the United States. Maybe you have seen it, maybe not.
As Nintendo begins to take on new forms, it's important that we can measure how addictive they truly are.
And, yeah, censorship, just a little inappropriate.
The new Game Boy Micro. Extremely portable. Extremely stylish.
This is just playing to how desirable Nintendo thinks that the Game Boy is. I can't believe that that one actually was a real commercial, but indeed it is. Anywho, moving on to the Game Boy. So I'm going to talk about the Game Boy Micro in terms of pros and cons. So let's start with the pros. The first thing is, of course, its small size. And yes, I'm going to call this a pro because, after all, this is the Game Boy Micro. And if you don't like the size, you're free to go with a different size Game Boy, including the Advance or the Advance SP. Now this is a really, really great built little device here. It is made out of metal, so I believe that this is aluminum. Here we have a matte finish to it, and this is the Famicom version. You can see it's got this glossy type finish. Very, very well built, very sturdily built. It makes it feel gadgety, something that we could find today and not really like a toy. So if anything, I think that the appearance holds up to the test of time, especially when looking at modern day technology like the Galaxy S6. You see we've got this aluminum band here on the side, and you can see the size comparison here to a modern sized day device. Really, really very, very tiny. Here we have just the normal sized 3DS, and you can see how small that is, and once we open it, check that out. Really very small. Impressive for being released in 2005 if you really think about it. So let's take a tour around this device. On the front here, we've got our directional pad and also an A and B button. We've also got a speaker here. On the top, we've got our shoulder buttons, left and right. Now, some people have not been so happy with the placement of the shoulder buttons. Most people would like to feel the click right here on the side, but instead we feel it more towards the center. That's something that hasn't really bothered me, but it's just a remark. We've got our charging port here. On the bottom, we've got our select button and our start button. You've got your power switch and also the cartridge slots and a headphone jack. Curiously, the Game Boy Advance SP does not have a headphone jack, so that's nice to see it squeezed into this little body. On the right side, we've got our volume rocker. Left-hand side, there is nothing. Then on the back, we have our battery compartment. So there's just a little screw here. I believe it's a 460 milliamp hour battery, so it's really not a big battery. But for this guy, it really doesn't require a big battery. I can get anywhere from 5 to 8 hours of battery life on this, just depending on the brightness. And speaking of brightness, not only is this a volume rocker, but it also doubles as the ability to turn up the brightness or down the brightness on the display that is coupled with holding down this left shoulder button. So even though we've got a very tiny device here, these are very normal sized buttons. Here we can compare them to what we have on the 3DS That directional pad is really the same size from what I can see here, maybe even just a little bit bigger. And also our A and B buttons look just to be a little bit bigger. So I've had no trouble whatsoever with the button sizes. They're nice and tactile and clicky. They don't get stuck. They don't feel cheap. Again, this is a very well-built device. So let's turn this puppy on, shall we? We've got a 2-inch display here. This is 240 by 160. It's a PPI of 144.22 PPI, so just 144 pixels per inch. That is a very high resolution for the time, especially because the Game Boy Advance is about 99 pixels per inch. So jumping up from 99 to 144 is pretty significant, and you can really see it. It looks great. Now, I was telling you earlier, you can turn up the brightness on this display, and it gets pretty nice and bright. You can see we can turn it all the way down there. This will make the battery life, of course, last longer. So we've got the Zelda game here. Now, continuing to talk about this display, this is an LCD display, but it is not IPS. It doesn't have the greatest of viewing angles. If I hold it too much downward, it really washes out. And if I hold it up this way, it's really contrasty, so you kind of have to find that sweet spot when looking at it. But comparatively to the others in the Game Boy line, I would call this the best LCD display that Nintendo output onto a device. So this little Game Boy looks very minimalistic in terms of features. But we do have the ability to put this into sleep mode. And it tells you to get out of the sleep mode, you need to press the select button, the L button, R button at the same time. So that's really nice, and it's going to flash here for you. So these little buttons here are very important and play a crucial role in telling you what's going on with the device. So when they flash like this, it means that your game is on pause. Now just say we turn it off. If we turn it on, you can see that this will flash 3 times. That means that there is enough of a charge. And if you turn it on and it shows red and it flashes 3 times, it means that the battery life is low, and of course these will just stay lit red. So once they are lit red, it means you've got 20% or 30% battery life left. You don't have any little indicators on the display. But having 20 to 30% battery life left is fair enough to let you know that you need to start thinking about charging it. And once you get a feel for how long your gameplay lasts, you'll know how long you have. So I think what they have here is quite clever, and I don't really think it's a con. Another nice feature that we have with this little Game Boy here is that it's personalizable, so you can take off these faceplates. So let's go ahead and switch with the Famicom version. If you go on eBay, you can find a lot of aftermarket products. Ones that have different cute designs and stuff. Oops, and you have to put it in just like this. From the right-hand side, press downward. There you go. So I find this to be very cute. So let's step into talking about the gameplay. Here we have Super Mario Advance. This is Super Mario Bros. 2. And now to somebody who has good eyes and you don't really need reading glasses, I think that this works just fine. I know that it's a little bit small, but I haven't had much of an issue at all with playing on this tiny little screen. These buttons are very nice and responsive, so I have not had any issues whatsoever. I found this to be very enjoyable for long plane flights. And once you get used to everything, it's really a charmer, I think. Really very, very cute. Works very, very well for gameplay. I don't really have any complaints. Now, of course, I need to step into talking about some of the cons. That would be a good time to do while looking at the gameplay. Yes, some people can't handle the size of the display. It's only 2 inches, very, very small. And you can see just how tiny little Mario is here. So for some, that's going to be bothersome, and it might cause some eye strain, especially if you're not used to looking at things so closely. So just keep this in mind about this little thing. I would assume that as this is not available readily on the market, you're probably not going to go and seek one out if you have real eye strain problems. Also regarding gameplay, like I was mentioning a little bit earlier, this is not backward compatible with any of the Game Boy or Game Boy Color games, so you are going to be limited to the Game Boy Advance market, but there are a lot of games for the Game Boy Advance. There are a lot of SNES ports, there are NES ports, there are just native games that are made for the Game Boy Advance. I think that you have a very advanced library, so I don't have much to complain about, but that's something to pay attention to. You should probably go with an SP or just a normal Advance if you want that diverse library. Now, while I love these little faceplates on here, one thing I don't appreciate is just how easily they scratch. Let's see if I can try to show this. They actually provide you with a little carrying bag so that you try to minimize scratches, but I noticed that they're even scratched right out of the factory. I got this brand new. So these scratch very easily, and if you don't store it in a sock or something, it's just gonna look terrible over time. Also, because this is not airtight, you get little fuzzies that get underneath the display, and I have to remove this every so often to get out that dust. So the dust is in the way, and I can see it obstructing the screen when I'm playing, and that can get quite annoying here and there. And for some, as I was saying, I think that it's very clever what they're doing for the battery life indication. Some are not going to appreciate that you don't have a battery life indicator. If you're someone who's a casual gamer, you might have no idea when you used it last and what the battery life is like. So it's probably best to top it off. It's not the fastest at charging. It takes about 3 hours to fully charge. As far as the speaker that we have on here, it's this really teeny tiny little speaker, and if you are in any type of loud environment, you're going to find it very, very hard to hear. This is the loudest that it gets, and it's okay for now in this quiet environment. But you do have that headphone jack. Now, the one thing about the headphone jack is that when you plug it in, you get kind of a whirring type of a sound. And when the game is playing and you can hear noise that's in the foreground, the whirring just kind of fades into the background and you don't notice it anymore. So I think that it sounds pretty immersive when you have the headphones in. It's good that this headphone jack does have stereo sound though, as this is just a single speaker on the front. So let's wrap up this little throwback. Do you think that this is a classic, or would you consider this a throwback and you're just happy to see what we have now? Namely 3DS. We've got our comfortable, cozy 3DS XL sized screens versus our little dinky thing here. But for me, what really does it is the look and the feel. It just feels modern to me. Something from 10 years ago looks like it could belong into today. And I like that if I look at the bottom of the 3DS, you can see that we've got a very, very similar looking layout here. So it looks just like the bottom, really, of a 3DS. Cute as a button, very, very well built, not region locked like the rest of the Game Boy series. So whether I decided to pick up the Famicom version from Japan, or I wanted a European version, which is this, or I got an American version, all the games will play. So if you're curious as to where to get one of these, your best bet is going to be eBay. I got this brand new. Now, a little bit of a hint here is that these are really, really expensive in the United States. So you're going to be paying maybe $200 for a brand new one. If you try to do a broader search on eBay and do a search for European countries as well, I was able to get this brand new for $70, I believe. So $70 versus $200. This came out at $100 on the market. So I did not think that that was too bad. Not too bad at all. These seem to retain their value. So thank you everybody for watching. This has been Erica, the technology nerd, likes to film stuff. Please rate, comment, and subscribe in the comment section below. Let me know what you want to see thrown back next. I found my little carrying bag. I dropped it underneath the chair. Now it can keep it nice and not scratched. Again, let me know what you think about this. Do you think this is a classic or a true throwback? Or are you just subscribed to believing that pretty much anything that Nintendo makes can be seen as a classic eventually? They make great stuff after all. So let me know what you think, and have a good night.